The frontiersman who reshaped the nation, Andrew Jackson, the seventh President of the United States, stands as one of the most enigmatic, consequential, and explosive figures in American history. Born in the rugged, poverty-stricken Waxhaws region along the border of North and South Carolina in 1767, Jackson was the first president who hailed not from the aristocratic, intellectual elite of Virginia or Massachusetts, but from the raw, unforgiving American frontier. Before his ascent to the highest office, he was a self-made man who carved out a formidable reputation as a lawyer, a judge, a plantation owner, and, above all, a military genius and war hero. Jackson's victory at the Battle of New Orleans in 1815 transformed him into an American icon. It proved to the world that an army of ragtag volunteers, frontiersmen, and militiamen could decisively defeat the finest fighting force in Europe. This military triumph laid the groundwork for his political career, allowing him to tap into a deep, swelling vein of American populism. The common man had found his champion. Yet, the legacy of Andrew Jackson is a complex tapestry woven with threads of unprecedented democratic expansion and the dark realities of authoritarianism and racial oppression. Old Hickory did not merely occupy the presidency, he weaponized it. By challenging the entrenched establishment, shattering political norms, and reshaping the American landscape, Jackson established the precedent of the modern presidency. This text explores the life, the legend, the high-stakes narrative, and the provocative questions surrounding Andrew Jackson, the man who redefined the American presidency. The controversial legend, champion of democracy or lawless tyrant. To understand Andrew Jackson, one must confront the duality of his character. On one hand, he was the great democratizer. His election in 1828 marked the beginning of Jacksonian democracy, a period characterized by the expansion of suffrage to most white men, regardless of property ownership. Prior to Jackson, American governance was largely controlled by wealthy, land-owning elites who operated through closed caucuses. Jackson upended this system. He argued that the common man, farmers, mechanics, and laborers possessed the same political wisdom as the educated elite. He believed in majority rule, the rotation of office, and direct accountability to the voters. In this light, Jackson was the ultimate champion of democracy, empowering the masses and bringing the government closer to the people. On the other hand, his critics viewed him as a lawless tyrant. Jackson's governing philosophy was deeply personal and remarkably rigid. If he believed a law, an institution, or a Supreme Court decision stood in the way of the popular will, or his own, he often chose to ignore or dismantle it. He vetoed more bills in his 2 terms than all 6 of his predecessors combined, utilizing the presidential veto not just for constitutional reasons, but as a blunt political instrument to thwart the will of Congress. His detractors mocked him as King Andrew I, arguing that he had subverted the Constitution and trampled upon the system of checks and balances. This tension between his democratic ideals and his autocratic tendencies is the defining feature of his legacy. Was he expanding the rights of the ordinary citizen, or was he manipulating the masses to consolidate executive power? Jackson's actions forced Americans to grapple with this very question, sparking debates that echo through the halls of modern politics. The high-stakes narrative, honor, fire, and the White House, the story of Andrew Jackson, reads more like a Hollywood script than a historical biography. He was a man defined by a relentless, often violent commitment to his personal honor. Orphaned at a young age during the American Revolution, Jackson carried a profound distrust and hatred for the British, a sentiment cemented when he was slashed across the face and hand by a British officer for refusing to shine his boots as a prisoner of war. As an adult living on the frontier, Jackson was quick-tempered and notorious for his involvement in duels. He fought over 100 duels in his lifetime, driven by the need to defend his reputation and the honor of his beloved wife, Rachel. The most infamous of these confrontations occurred in 1806 when Jackson dueled a skilled marksman named Charles Dickinson. Dickinson fired first, striking Jackson in the chest, near his heart. Staggering but remaining on his feet, Jackson calmly raised his pistol and fired, fatally wounding Dickinson. The bullet remained lodged near Jackson's heart for the rest of his life, causing him chronic pain and serving as a permanent physical reminder of his fiery, unyielding spirit. This same unrelenting fire was brought directly to the White House. The 1828 election was one of the dirtiest and most chaotic in American history. The elite establishment was horrified by the populist revolution Jackson sparked. When he won, the celebration inside the White House was tumultuous. A boisterous crowd of commoners, frontiersmen, and everyday citizens flooded the executive mansion, causing chaos, breaking China, and forcing the president to be evacuated for his own safety. Jackson's presidency was defined by high-stakes conflicts. The most spectacular of these was the Bank War, an epic political struggle against the Second Bank of the United States. Jackson viewed the bank as an engine of corruption, a monster institution that concentrated vast financial power in the hands of Eastern elites at the expense of the working class. He declared total war on the establishment by vetoing the bill to wreck harder the bank and subsequently withdrawing federal funds, distributing them to smaller state banks. Despite the economic instability and the eventual financial panic of 1837 that followed, Jackson's crusade against the bank endeared him to the masses, providing a vivid demonstration of his willingness to fight the powerful on behalf of the people. The first assassination attempt, a symbol of Jackson's defiance, no moment captures the sheer, almost mythical resilience of Andrew Jackson, quite like the assassination attempt of 1835. On January 30th of that year, the 67-year-old president was attending a congressional funeral inside the United States Capitol. As he exited the building, an unemployed house painter named Richard Lawrence stepped out from the crowd, raised a pistol, and aimed directly at Jackson's chest. The gun misfired, filling the air with noise and smoke. Before anyone could react, Lawrence pulled a second loaded pistol, aimed, and pulled the trigger. It too misfired. In a staggering statistical anomaly, the odds of both pistols failing to fire were later calculated to be astronomical. What happened next shocked onlookers and cemented Jackson's legend. Instead of fleeing or allowing his guards to handle the situation, an enraged Jackson charged his would-be assassin. Frail and ailing, the elderly president beat the man viciously with his walking cane. Bystanders had to pull Old Hickory off the assassin to save the man's life. This episode perfectly encapsulated the essence of Andrew Jackson. He never ducked an issue, nor did he ever back down from a fight. His instinct was to attack the source of the threat directly, a trait that made him beloved by his supporters and feared by his political enemies. The incident further elevated his persona as a fearless, passionate leader who would fight for his life and his vision of the country. The provocative question, did Jackson create the modern presidency? Looking at the modern American political landscape, with its focus on anti-establishment candidates, populist rhetoric, and direct appeals to the masses over the heads of party leadership, one is forced to ask, is the modern American presidency the creation of one volatile, self-made soldier from the frontier? The answer is a resounding yes. Long before the era of modern political outsiders, Andrew Jackson declared war on the Washington establishment to give a voice to the forgotten masses. He transformed the presidency from an administrative office that merely executed the laws passed by Congress into an institution of immense executive power. Jackson established the precedent that the president, as the sole nationally elected official, is the direct representative of the people. By doing so, he laid the foundation for the energetic, proactive, and dominant executive branch that defines the modern American government. Jackson also reshaped the political party system itself. He and his strategist, Martin Van Buren, built the Democratic Party into a highly organized, disciplined, and centralized political machine. This model of party organization, driven by grassroots campaigning and mass voter mobilization, transformed how elections were won in the United States. His political opponents, terrified by his use of executive power, eventually organized themselves into the Whig Party, solidifying the two-party system that endures to this day. While Jackson gave a voice to the masses, his populism was inextricably linked to the darker chapters of American history. His vision of the people was exclusionary, and his presidency was responsible for the devastating and forced relocation of Native American tribes through the Indian Removal Act of 1830. He ignored the rulings of the Supreme Court when they stood in the way of his westward expansionist policies. Furthermore, as a wealthy plantation owner, he was deeply committed to the institution of slavery and openly hostile to the early abolitionist movement. This duality, championing the liberty of white, working-class Americans while simultaneously denying the basic humanity and rights of Native Americans and enslaved black people, is a profound paradox of his presidency. The enduring legacy. The most explosive chapter in our nation's history, the legacy of Andrew Jackson, remains the most explosive and contentious chapter in a long history of the United States. Of all presidential reputations, Jackson's is perhaps the most difficult to summarize, representing a mass of contradictions: dictator or Democrat, ignoramus or genius, Satan or saint. To his supporters, Jackson was the ultimate patriot, a man who saved the Union during the nullification crisis when South Carolina threatened to secede over federal tariffs. By taking a forceful stance against nullification and threatening military action, Jackson reinforced the principle of federal supremacy and cemented the concept of an indivisible union. He paid off the national debt, championed the common citizen, and democratized American society. He proved that power did not need to reside solely in the hands of the educated and the wealthy. To his detractors, Jackson's use of executive power, his disregard for the Supreme Court, and his brutal policies toward Native Americans mark him as a tyrannical, autocratic figure. The Trail of Tears, the forced, tragic relocation of the Cherokee and other tribes, remains a permanent stain on his historical record. These contradictions mean that Jackson's legacy is constantly reinterpreted by each successive generation of historians and politicians. During his own time and the decades that followed, he was viewed as the champion of the common people. In the mid-20th century, historians often praised his struggle against moneyed elites. In modern times, the focus has shifted heavily toward the ethical atrocities of his Indian removal policies and his pro-slavery stance. Yet, the parallels between Jacksonian populism and modern anti-establishment political movements continue to be drawn by political observers. Whether celebrated for empowering the masses or condemned for his authoritarian actions, Andrew Jackson changed the DNA of the American presidency forever. Conclusion. The man who weaponized the presidency, Andrew Jackson, was much more than a historical figure. He was a force of nature. From his humble beginnings on the frontier to his explosive time in the White House, Jackson challenged every convention, institution, and tradition he encountered. He brought the raw, combative energy of the frontier into the polished halls of Washington, sparking a populist revolution that permanently altered the political dynamics of the nation. He weaponized the presidency, using the veto power, the force of his personality, and direct appeals to the voters to overcome a hostile Congress and an entrenched financial establishment. In doing so, he forged a new kind of executive branch, one that was active, powerful, and driven by the will of the masses. His creation of a modern, highly organized political party further institutionalized his democratic vision. However, the legacy of this self-made soldier is inextricably linked with the darkest aspects of the American experience. His championing of the common man did not extend to people of color or indigenous populations, and his policies resulted in profound suffering and injustice. This dichotomy is what makes his chapter in American history so explosive and so essential to study. To understand Andrew Jackson is to understand the core paradox of American democracy itself, the struggle between the empowerment of the majority and the protection of the marginalized. He was a volatile, self-made soldier who shattered political norms and reshaped the American landscape forever. Ultimately, the modern American presidency, with its immense power and its direct connection to the electorate, is the enduring creation of Andrew Jackson, the common man's hero who redefined the nation. His legacy will forever remain a profound and explosive testament to the power of the populist spirit in American history.